coral out in Dibba Rock in the east coast of the United States, Arab Emirates in Fujairah. And we had a little bit of a bleaching event a few years back. We had some dead fish and stuff like that. And I thought to myself, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could study why that's happening and see if we can do something about it? So I employed some marine biologists. We started about 4 years ago on working on prototypes. And what we realized very quickly was that the water here is fantastic for growing coral, but coral needs something to grow on. And we have a lot of sand. And just at that same sort of time, I found this photograph on the internet, not my photograph, of Dubai in the 1990s. And at that point in time, it was a desert with a couple of lane highway that went through the middle of it. And as you can see, maybe 4, 5, 6 buildings. And it really made me think, because I started looking around in the place that I live. I live in Dubai, and I mean, it's just a beautiful city now. So I started to think about, well, hang on a second, we're working with sand on the bottom of the ocean. It's kind of like Dubai in 1990. What do we need to do to transform that into an underwater city, which is essentially what a coral reef is? So we started to look at it, and basically, I mean, for anything like a city or an underwater city, you need 3 things for it to grow. You need food, you need habitat, and you need work. And if any one of those things start to shrink, then the population starts to leave. I mean, if suddenly there was nothing to eat in Dubai, then you know, we wouldn't have many people there. If there was no work, people wouldn't come here. So let's start with habitat. So David was talking earlier about coral reefs, and I know it's a passion of his, and beautiful photographs in his session. I'm going to dig into it a little bit more. Coral is actually an ecosystem architect. It actually builds its own environment. So you've seen the beautiful pictures that have been shown today. Coral is essentially an animal together with algae. They are symbiotic. The algae basically looks at the sun, photosynthesizes just like plants, provides sugars and energy to the animal that lives there. The animal then consumes that, defecates, and produces food for the algae. And as it's doing that, it starts to secrete all of these calcium carbonate structures that form these wonderful shapes that you see on coral reefs, and that provides habitat for lots and lots of different species. So it creates its own habitat. We call it an ecosystem architect. Oops, sorry. Now food, I mean, just like on land, you know, plants are at the bottom of the food chain, and it's the same thing on coral reefs. So, you know, higher plant productivity. So the more that the algae works, the more animals we can have. So the more coral you get, de facto, the more sea creatures you get, the more fish you get, the more species start to inhabit the reef. And for work, well, coral reefs actually create their own little ecosystem. They attract species that come along and keep it clean. They, you know, do the gardening, take the trash out, all the stuff that it needs to be healthy and productive. So what we started to do was to think about, well, how are we going to create this city? I mean, it's not going to be Dubai, but we wanted to create something, you know, meaningful underwater. And we came up with an education system, first of all, so that we could explain to people exactly what we're trying to do, and then teach them how to do it. And then we came up with a strategy around taking small little thumb-sized pieces of coral from the floor, the ones that are still living, the ones that get broken off by wave action or by, you know, careless divers or whatever. And we then take those little thumb pieces and put them into these nursery tables, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. And then we grow them out. And we're essentially coral gardening on these tables. And the whole idea is that we grow them out to a size where we can transplant them and start to create more reefs with it. So the project is, as I mentioned, on the east coast of the UAE, in a place called Dibba in Fujairah. Now, it's not a galaxy far, far away, but here are a few details. So James Campbell is our resident marine biologist. We're doing this from the Radisson Blu Hotel in Dibba. We started back in July with a granted piece of land from the environmental agency under the water. And since then, we've basically been building out more and more structures, nursery tables, and then artificial reefs. So the reason we're doing this is that, coral is an essential part of our ecosystem, as a lot of people have talked about today. It represents less than 1% of the ocean floor globally, and yet it supports 25 to 30% of the species in the ocean. Take it away, the ocean is going to start to degrade significantly. It won't grow on sand. It needs something solid to grow on. So normally in nature, it would grow on rock. If a ship sinks or something like that, coral will grow on it if it's at the right depth. But on our sandy coastline, there's nothing for it to grow on outside of the natural patch reefs. So we essentially decided to create that substrate. Oh, God, I keep doing that. So what we've done is combined a little bit of art with some functional structures that allow us to transfer coral onto something beautiful and create a garden under the water. So as you can see here, we've got structures like we've got a shark, which is about 5 meters long. We have a stingray that we've put down. These are just a few examples. The stingray was actually designed in a school competition that we ran last year, where we had 128 schools participating in a radio competition. We had about 2,000 entries from kids that were 5-year-olds up to 18-year-olds. Some amazing entries, and we've actually built about 25 of those entries since. On the right-hand side, we've got a nice octopus, and that one's about, I think it's about 8 meters long, very heavy. And all of these things are sponsored by companies. We have a lot of companies in this country that have very active corporate social responsibility programs. And so we've been out talking to them and saying, listen, help us to build this underwater city. And so these guys have been, basically funding the creation of these reefs. And what we do for them is every month we produce footage, photography, videography, give them back images of how their piece of the underwater city is growing. They use it on their social media, etc. That attracts more people to come and do it. And then we do a scientific report every 3 months that shows the colonization and what's grown and what species have arrived there. So the nursery tables are the base of what we are doing, and they're about 2.5 meters by just over a meter, and we build them out of steel. We put 1-inch 25-millimeter grids on top of it, and as you can see, we then put little tubes and we plant the coral fragments into those tubes. The reason we do that is because it's much easier for us to take them out again afterwards when we want to transplant them onto the artistic structures. We can get about 200 coral fragments on one table when they're thumb size. And to give you an idea of the amount of work that is, to collect the coral fragments, transplant them, put them onto the tables, it's about 7 hours of work for a single table. So it's very, very labor intensive. We build the structures out of ocean-friendly materials. So we primarily use iron, naturally occurring element in the ocean. And we also do some structures with concrete. We use Portland concrete because that doesn't have any additives or anything nasty that's going to hurt the sea.
And occasionally we use glass as well to create smaller habitats. You might have noticed on the shark we made eyes out of bottles and stuff like that. So the way we're doing it is, first of all, I'm working with Azraq closely to find sponsors. And we've had lots and lots of different companies. DIS, a metal trader, we've had Dell Computers, we've had Express Feeders, a shipping company, Mubadala, Sovereign Wealth Fund. There's a lot of different companies that have sponsored us, and they basically then get a team together and they'll do one of three things. They'll say, show us a catalog, what can we get? They'll turn it into a team building exercise where they actually get their guys to design reefs with us. We've been doing CAD/CAM and all sorts of things with them. Or they get our children's designs from school competition. That then goes into construction. Takes us usually a week to 2 weeks to construct these metal sculptures. We sink them. Typically we film them. We have a professional film crew that does all of the filming of the stuff on land and then it going into the sea, and then we come back, as I mentioned, every month and film progression. Then we plant all the coral, and then afterwards we go into monitoring. So this is an ongoing process. Every week we're working on this. So the results, since we got the new space, we've put down 23 large structures and a bunch of smaller ones. We've managed to get 14 new sponsors. We've already got, in fact, it's gone up to 25 structures that we're building before the end of Q1 at this point. And we've also set up a kind of scholarship fund so that people who have time to come and learn about this stuff and get involved, if they don't have money but they have time, we can actually fund their education on coral propagation, coral education, and also how to do the diving part of it as well. So we're building up quite a nice community. And I guess just to finish off, so it's going to be a much shorter presentation than the previous ones. To finish off, what I'd like to do is to say, we've seen so many beautiful images across the world of different animals and conservation projects. There's more to come this afternoon. We have projects like this within this country. So if you live here and you want to get involved, then you can join us in many ways. You can help us to find corporations that want to sponsor either coral nursery tables or making nice artificial reefs. We work with schools, universities, corporations, lots of people who get involved. You can help to come along and do scientific dives with us or find sponsorship money to do those as well. Learn about coral propagation, become a volunteer within our team. Or, if you're a photographer, and apparently there are one or two here, then you can also come along and get some wonderful images of all of this stuff and share those widely as well. So, if you do want to get involved, contact me on sales@azraqme.com.org rather, and we'd love to see more people along. Thank you.